and share my screen. So welcome to the Budget and Compensation Subcommittee meeting. Dr. Graham and Dr. Fleming will be here momentarily. Today we are going to talk about hold harmless. I know we talked about that last month. We're going to continue that conversation, and then we are going to go into part 2 with, I know there was discussion around graduate degrees and teacher effectiveness and the research around that. And Dr. Kevin Bastian is here to present on his findings around that research. I know that Dr. Graham and Dr. Fleming, they wanted to focus on North Carolina research. So that's what we've done for part 2 today. So there were 3 articles that were sent out, and we will focus on those during today's whole group discussion. So all of the discussions today are whole group. And then after those discussions, we'll go into adjournment. I wanted to see if there's a motion to approve the agenda for today.
So moved, Monica Lambert.
Thank you, Monica. Is there a second?
Second, Brenda Burr.
Thank you, Brenda. And is there a motion for the minutes?
Approved. This is Catherine Truitt.
Thank you, Catherine.
Second, this is Marcy.
And thank you, Marcy. Sorry about that. Just hold on just 1 second. And these, I just wanted to reiterate the norms that we've been upholding during all of our meetings, in particular, making sure we have shared time to talk and that we value all opinions of the membership here today. And just a reminder, the 2 guiding principles, making sure that your idea has an impact on students and it is measurable in an authentic setting, namely the classroom or schools in particular. And we went over this last month around the estimated timeline. So we've had the May and June. This is the June meeting, and we'll have one more meeting in July. And then the goal is to present to PEPSC as a discussion item in August, gain approval by PEPSC in September, go to the board in October, and then depending on the discussion from the state board, having the approval in either November or December. Just a few of our reminders in particular, I wanted to point out the first bullet, that the goal of the subcommittee meetings is to make changes as determined to the current draft model. I just want to reiterate that we have this meeting and one more meeting to make those changes if this subcommittee wishes to make any changes. So I really want to make sure that we're trying to take action during the meeting. And that'll be part of the presentation as well, is to really hone in on what changes the subcommittee wants to make. And just a reminder of what those subcommittee responsibilities and priorities are. For budget and compensation, it's determine minimum salary scenarios, determine amount for professional advancement accounts. So those 2 areas we have discussed in detail. We are working on hold harmless provisions and then the cost of proposal with phase-in strategies from OSBM. So we're working on the hold harmless piece right now. Recently, and I know there's been discussion in multiple subcommittees, there have been multiple teacher feedback sessions, and some probing questions came out that were able to be delegated to each of the subcommittees. And in particular, thinking about those questions, and I know I sent this PowerPoint to you ahead of time, but I really want you to think about these questions as we go through each of the parts today. The call to action, clarify any hold harmless proposal, national board, certified teacher and master's pay. Those were big topics during the teacher feedback sessions, and address veteran teachers' concerns about where they fall in the license/pay structure, which really can fall under the hold harmless proposal. And Mrs. Julie Pittman, who provided those feedback sessions to different groups of teachers across the state, she is here today. I want you to have a couple minutes to read over these questions, but if there are any questions around the feedback that she gathered, or any of these questions, I want everyone to feel free to ask about those right now. Okay. Well, as you can see, these questions do have to do with the topics that we will be talking about today during the subcommittee, so we can keep these in the back of our minds as we go through the topics today. And so part one, we're going to focus on the hold harmless discussion. The Teacher Recruitment and Retention Task Force met in May, and we gathered that feedback as we said we would during the last subcommittee meeting. And we wanted to focus on how to address that feedback and then what options we would have as far as if there are particular changes that we want to vote on today or gather from subcommittee members. So I'm going to dive right into the feedback. These are the notes from the meeting, and I just want to highlight that they focused on the old system versus the new system, that having one system would be easier while holding teachers harmless, and that if there were two systems, that there needed to be some kind of provision with a time limit without loss and compensation until successful transition in the new model. So they were really thinking about how to transition into the new model from the old model if that was part of the hold harmless considerations. And then suggestion was made to use the current salary scale and the new scale as a choice for those being held harmless. But the new teachers that enter the system, they would use the new pay scale, which this wouldn't penalize or decrease pay for the established teachers. And then they wondered more about master's pay and national board pay. How does this impact the new system? What are the decisions around that? And as new people enter, do they get a choice? In particular, they were talking about out-of-state teachers. You can see in the third bullet up, out-of-state teachers will have the same hold harmless. That's what they suggested. Have the same experience, except not necessarily pay as the last state where they taught. And then the bullet before that, it says, believe master's pay should be part of the new system to avoid lowering current teacher salaries. So there was a lot of concern around lowering experienced teacher salaries within the state to prevent that. And then the last two bullets, 3 to 5 years would be the maximum number for license levels, but a teacher does not have to stay on that particular license level if they fulfill the competencies early. And so they also wanted to know who's responsible for ensuring teachers meet those competencies, in particular micro-credentials. And that there would need to be more human capital for the licensure division in order for that to be done. And then they requested that finance officers be a part of the feedback. And I know that this group has also indicated that as a desire as well. And the co-chairs and DPI have talked about gaining feedback from finance officers after the recommendations are provided to them, particularly after this meeting, to get their feedback from different finance officers from across the state, rather than placing them on the subcommittee as new members. We'd rather talk to them in a group around what changes could be made, or what the model looks like after decisions are made by this subcommittee, and then they can provide that feedback. And that's something then that we could talk about during the July meeting. Any questions about this feedback? So we wanted to think about making decisions around hold harmless, but I wanted to give everyone a chance to be able to react to the feedback. Are there any comments, questions, thoughts? Okay, thinking about the feedback and what we've talked about during the past month, thinking about hold harmless, what the time limit would be for hold harmless, how it would work for out-of-state teachers versus new teachers to North Carolina, especially around experience level, and then thinking about using one system versus two systems, and then where national board and master's pay belongs. Any thoughts around time limit?
So this is Marcy. Currently there's not a time limit on hold harmless. The way that it's been done, you basically work your way out of it as your salary, or as the salary scale increases. You look at it comparatively every year for anyone, and they receive the higher of whichever salary there is. So I don't know that I would feel comfortable putting a hold harmless. And maybe I'm confused about the hold harmless. Are we talking about within the new model, or is it existing teachers moving to this new model?
Well, that would be a decision for the subcommittee. I know we've talked about established teachers could possibly move to the new model, giving them that option.
Kim,
Yes.
this is Tom. May I weigh in here just a bit?
Sure.
So it's a great question, Marcy. So I think under this model, for existing North Carolina teachers, you're talking most likely about a hold harmless that allows the person to catch up in the model. And so the numbers are very, very small of who would have to be held harmless. And then if the recommendation is to include National Board certification pay, as we anticipate that probably will be the decision, then that would be even smaller. So there's that one. So in other words, I'm a level 4 teacher and I should be making 56, and I'm currently making 63. So we would say one way to do that is to hold them harmless with until the renewal cycles catches them up with the current pay structure, and then they're not held harmless anymore. So the one you described, working your way out of hold harmless. There's a second hold harmless that has to be thought about with this group. And that is, I don't know if it's technically a hold harmless, but it's the integration of out-of-state teachers into this model. We're going to have a really difficult time because we'll be the only state that constructs its teacher salary in this manner. And so how do you bring in somebody from out of state? Where do you position them? And then how do you hold them harmless as they catch up into the North Carolina system? So those are the two ways that I was thinking that the hold harmless needed to be directed by this subcommittee. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, that helps. I just don't know how I feel about a time limit. And I guess having done salary administration for 7 years prior to retirement, all the questions around that, I don't know that we could answer every one of them.
Well, what do you mean a time limit? Like, I mean, from what you said with phase out, yeah, every person. So I'm making, right. So I'm making 65 right now, and the model says I would only make 56. And so that person would be held at 65 until their salary under the new salary schedule caught them up or exceeded 65, right?
Right. So that's kind of indefinitely until they grow out of the older system.
Right. And
Right.
which I think would resonate more with the field, but I think we do have to recognize that there is a strategy to doing this that, and this is up to the committee, that you get one renewal cycle and then you are where you are, which is an option, but probably a little less palatable to the field.
And then at the same time, I could see someone saying, well, let's say that I am able to go, the newer one is better for me because I'm at the very top end and I'm one of these experts.
Right.
Then something happens and I fall. So, but the old scale, I was making more than this new scale. I think it just needs to be very clear that once you go to this new scale, you're on this new scale, and whatever happens within the new scale. Because I could see someone saying, well, I was making more money 4 years ago or 5 years ago before whatever effectiveness measure was in place. So I want to go back to that scale now because I'd have been making more money.
Right.
That's going to be a question. That's going to be a complaint and a concern. And I don't. So there again, that's even a more complex piece of this. But
all right, let me make sure, let me repeat back what you just said to make sure I've got it right, because I think you're raising a great point. So I'm currently a teacher in this current system making $65,000 a year. This new system rolls out. I qualify to be an advanced leadership, adult leadership. I qualify for the advanced license, and I get a job doing adult leadership.
right.
And I do that for 2 years, and something happens and the district decides they're going to go in another direction. I no longer hold that position. So I would drop back to 56, but my hold harmless salary, my original salary would have been 65.
Right.
You're saying that once you enter the system and collect compensation under the new system, there is no more hold harmless, that you're in that system now for better or for worse.
So I'm saying that is an option.
Yeah.
You know, and again, that's not going to be palatable for the field, to use your term.
Right.
They're going to want their cake and eat it too. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't support that. I just, knowing what I did for 7 years and everything that you could not even imagine question wise coming in. And so I think we need to probably consider that may be something that needs to be in policy or even in legislation specifically, about how that will be addressed for individuals. but and I'm not sure, Tom, that I fully understand your reference earlier, now that I'm thinking about it, to the one renewal cycle time limit piece. Can you just flesh that out a little bit for me?
Yeah, you could set up a hold harmless that says essentially, once you enter this, once you enter this model, you are held harmless if that's applicable for one renewal cycle, and then you're in the model. I'm not saying I think that's the right way to go. It's just been one that's been kicked around as a possibility for how you would do this. But I mean, I think whatever is the right, this subcommittee does need to decide what's the right pathway to doing a hold harmless as we move North Carolina teachers, and we need to be very specific that we're talking about North Carolina teachers from the old model into the new model.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear how others feel about this and what their thoughts are. I've got probably 10,000 pinging around in my head right now.
Well, this is Brian. I would propose that the hold harmless be permanent for an individual. So if you're an individual and your pay is higher now than it would be under the new system, your pay will never fall below what it is now under the old system, period. If you take an advanced role and then give up that advanced role, your pay will never fall below what it was before this new system was put in place. So it's a permanent guarantee that your pay will not fall below the current level. That seems to me essential to reassure teachers that this is not going to hurt anybody relative to the current system.
This is Brenda. I was gonna just put it in the message, but I agree with Marcy for North Carolina teachers that, and Brian, should be held harmless, make it permanent. But still really want to dig into the out-of-state conversation, because I think there's that license 1, 2, 3 spot, I think is going to be tricky. I think that license 4 part is going to be great for teachers to be able to pretty quickly move to that, but I'm still curious what everyone's thinking about the out-of-state.
So can I ask a question, Brian and Brenda? When you say permanent, do you mean until such time as they catch up in the new system, or just if your salary exceeded the current model, you would continue on with the step and lane until you retired? Or
No, what I was proposing is that, each year you would compare the current system with your old pay.
I got you.
Your old pay is higher, you get your old pay. If the current pay is higher, you get that. And so you're never falling below your current pay. So it's permanent in the sense that you're a permanent promise that your pay was not going to fall below what it was before you entered this system.
Great. Thanks.
Any other thoughts?
So is this, are we able to make a decision on this? I'm not hearing any pushback or objection to the idea of holding teachers harmless on the current salaries, wherever they are in the current salary structure, until such time as they meet or exceed that salary in the new model. Is that?
This is Catherine. I think that's what we're saying. And
Mhm.
again, this will be a decision that the General Assembly makes.
Sure.
But it sounds to me like we're planning to include this in our, in whatever, however this final model lands to the state board.
Okay.
And I would add to Brenda and Brian's comments, Tom, that it's not just until the new model they make more, but if in the new model they're in one of these roles that they may not have complete control over, like the advanced teacher roles, I mean, they don't always have the option to have those extra duties and responsibilities assigned to them. If they move back to a different level and that salary is less than what they would have made in the old model, the old model hold harmless comes back into play and they go back. They never go to less than what they're making the day that this new system takes over.
All right.
So Tom, my understanding when I brought that up to you was that because the teacher's pay is tied to the license, that's what prevents them from moving backwards in pay. Correct? They can still have that license even if they aren't taking on those duties. Is that correct?
They can have the license, but they don't get the salary differential unless they hold the position. So the scenario that Marcy's describing is possible. So I qualified for the adult leadership license. I got a job as an adult leader. And then let's say I decided that wasn't for me. I was going to go back to the classroom. That person would go back, would lose the differential based on the position, on the position. And so what Marcy's saying is, if that were to occur, we would still look at that person relative to their position on the old salary schedule to ensure that they never fell below what they were making when they originally entered the model. So we'd have to have some kind of, for every teacher that moves from old model to new model, only those that move in at a license 4, you'd have to have some kind of, we'd have to record their salary at the time of the move on the old model to ensure that they never went below that in the model, whatever the situation. Does that make, am I understanding it right? I want to make sure. So when we write this up, we know what we're saying.
I thought what Marcy was describing was someone who is in a leadership role who is no longer someone's no longer in that role either because they decide not to, or I'm trying to contemplate a scenario where it would be not a decision that person would make, but are we saying that they're going to be held harmless if they're no longer taking on the responsibilities of that leadership role?
They're not held harmless to the salary differential. So in this scenario, just to put numbers behind it, I'm an advanced teacher. I'm first year of the new model, and I'm an adult leadership teacher. I would make $72,000 a year. 2 years later, I either decide I don't want to do that anymore, or the district says, we're going in a different direction within adult leadership. It's a position that the salary differential is based on the job. So that teacher would be compensated, would lose the salary differential. And that would put them back to $56,000 a year, because that 30% differential is gone. Then what we would say is, does that 56,000, how does that compare to the salary of that individual when they move from the old model to the new model? And let's say they were making 60 when we moved to the new model. What we're saying with the hold harmless is that person makes 60. They can never go below the compensation they earned under the old model when they shifted to the new model. Does that? I think.
Yes, that's a very clear
Okay,
explanation.
Marcy, did I get that right according to your thoughts?
Yes, that's how it worked in my head.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I have it because I have to write it down. So that's good. And can we get some kind of Kim, I don't know, I don't think we need to do a roll call vote, but we need to see some kind of affirmation from other committee members that this is an acceptable hold harmless provision.
It can be within the chat that people provide that, or they can say it out loud. We can use either of those options.
All right, we've got Amy Holcomb,
Thank you.
Linda Berg,
Wendy,
Wendy Cabral,
Chad,
Chad, Brian. I'm assuming you agree because I feel like that's what,
Shonda, yes. Yes, there's Brian.
okay. Jeff, Shonda Cherry, and
And Monica.
Tiffany Carter. We'd love to hear from you. We heard right there's Monica. Okay.
I believe Miss Carter is Mrs. Pittman's intern.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm sorry about that. Okay. I'll circle back with Shonda, and she must be on a call or something, and we'll see.
No, mine, I put mine in the chat.
She put hers in there.
I'm sorry, I
Hers is
missed
in
you.
there.
Okay, great. This is excellent. Kim, I don't know if you want to talk about the out-of-state scenarios.
Did you want to do that, Tom?
Sure. So my best guess on this, so this is where this is going to get a little difficult, because people are going to continue, presumably once we enter this new model, that we won't generate a step and lane salary schedule anymore. So my best guess here is we would have to preserve the last step and lane salary schedule with years of experience and differentiated by advanced degrees in the year that we make the switch from old system to new system. We hold that last salary schedule. And as teachers come from out of state, we establish their threshold, their hold harmless. And they have a full 5-year cycle to kind of integrate into the new system. So establishing those measures of effectiveness in order to qualify for the license 4 or the advanced roles, whatever it may be. But as they come in, we give them that full 5 years to integrate into the new system and establish the salary that they will have. With the understanding that they would not be below, just like with the other teachers, they would not be below that threshold at which they entered. The problem is, as you move years down the road, that step and lane schedule is going to be lower and lower relative to the pay of teachers in North Carolina under this current model. So I'm not really sure how to address that right now. But that is it's not a recommendation. It's just the way I've been thinking about it. And I'm happy to open this up for others to provide any alternate plan there for how we integrate out-of-state teachers.
Just to let everyone know, Dr. Graham is now present.
So, Tom, would there ever be a scenario where if a teacher could provide from out of state their educator effectiveness data, that they could be put on, let's say, a license 4?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and you currently have that provision in statute.
Right.
So if they now so if they present effectiveness data, so just their evaluation ratings under this model would not be sufficient, unless that gets changed. And in the licensure group, about one of the measures of effectiveness, in the straw man model, we built kind of a 360 evaluation process, which we don't anticipate would be, there would be no comparable model like that in any other state. So that presents a challenge. But certainly if they brought EVOS, if they brought testing from another state, that could qualify them for a license 3. They did a preparation program and they completed their testing in another state, then yeah, they would qualify for license 3 in North Carolina. So I think there are ways that it could be integrated, that they could quickly integrate, especially for your earlier career teachers. But it's the more experienced teachers, the 15-year veterans, or those folks that are retiring from Virginia or South Carolina and coming to work another 10 years or so in North Carolina. That's the ones that are going to be particularly problematic.
Right. Okay. All right. That helps.
So Tom, this is Catherine again. This one has me it's definitely giving me heartburn. So we need to let's just, for the sake of argument, say that this begins to be phased in 2024. It's going to be, we'll be the only state that's doing this. We will either be famous or infamous, and hopefully famous.
Yes.
And we need to not seem like a hostile state for teachers to come to from out of state. They can't be penalized because they didn't financially, because they didn't come up in North Carolina.
Right.
So how can we, what are we going to be able to do for a teacher who comes here at year 15 of experience, who went to a traditional EPP that had Ed TPA or something like that, and then and is nationally board certified? And what if they don't teach an EVOS subject, or they are not, they don't come from an EVOS state? What are we going to be able to do for them?
Yeah. So so there's a couple of things I think we could do. So even under our current model, so let's say this is a teacher coming to us from Virginia. So our pay is lower than Virginia. So 20-year veteran coming here from Virginia is probably taking $5,000-$6,000 pay cut to come work in North Carolina. So that there is, and we don't hold them harmless. We just situate them on that salary schedule where they come in. And as far as the best of my thinking here is that we do hold the step and lane kind of in abeyance so that as people come into North Carolina, we can situate them. All right, thank you, Brenda. Well taken. We could situate them on the salary schedule where they would have been on that step and lane and let them integrate like we do every other teacher. Like you'll never make less than that, but as you integrate into this model, there's the potential for you to earn more. And and that would be the way that I would propose it. And I want to make sure everybody on this call understands why this is such a huge issue. Out-of-state teachers represent about a third of our pipeline in the state. This is not something we can ignore and expect that everything will be okay. If we take action that damages that out-of-state pipeline, then we run serious risk of not being able to staff our schools. So I don't want anybody to think this is just a one-off, that everything would be fine. It clearly will not be unless we find a way to solve this problem.
So that's, you raise a really good point, which is that if we become known as the state who doesn't pay solely based on years of experience, Tom, you and I both know the number of people who are trying to get licensed here from to get whatever their license is from their home state converted to a North Carolina license. And they get upset when they don't get what they feel, when it doesn't convert to the level that they feel it should convert to. So how will we ensure that when we're converting, it won't be as easy to convert simply to steps, or from years of experience. So it seems to me like there's going to be some kind of subjective piece of this where someone is looking at someone's record, for lack of a better term, and saying, yes, you qualify to be in a leadership role in the state.
This is Jeff. Tom, I have a thought or suggestion to add, piggybacking on what Superintendent True was just saying. The straw man model sort of has a semi step and lane proposal that every 5-year renewal, you get a $5,000 increase in salary.
Right.
And I know some of the feedback we've heard from teachers, and I think discussions on this subcommittee have talked about that we probably need some type of blended model of what's being proposed and an experience type schedule. What if we come up with something that marries, what's in the proposal in some fashion, along with a step and lane, that then makes it both? I think it would probably make the plan more appealing to current teachers, because it might more adequately place them where they need to be, would incentivize staying in the profession longer, but also might make it easier for out-of-state teachers coming in. So, it's sort of like a license 4+ versus a years of experience. So maybe if you're at license 4 plus 5 years, there's an increase. License 4 plus 10 years, there's an increase, whatever it might be. But some type of blended model that might fix both the out-of-state problem, but also make it more appealing. I've tried playing around with some ideas, but just wanted to throw that out there as a thought. I think that's something that this subcommittee's discussed in the past as well.
And I will add to that it needs to be something that a school district rep and a principal who's doing recruiting for their building can explain in very clear terms. Because trying to explain the old hold harmless system or existing hold harmless system is confusing enough for those of us who have been around since dirt, like myself. But our principals never understood it and couldn't help people. They still struggle with communicating well to out-of-state teachers about master's pay and other things. So whatever is out there, to Ms. Truitt's points about and to Jeff's points about it, being friendly, it needs to be as easy to explain and articulate as possible, whatever we're going to do there.
So, Brenda, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. The question for everybody is, what is the typical years of experience? So I assume you mean average year of experience for our out-of-state teachers. I think my best guess there is it looks fairly similar to the distribution of our teaching force. Like I don't see that it's predominantly early career teachers that are coming. We know that there are several of those. We have many districts that have active recruiting relationships with out-of-state EPPs. I think particularly Pennsylvania, there's a number of EPPs that have just recruitment. They come down and they actually do their internships in North Carolina and go ahead and get licensed in North Carolina. So you've got beginning teachers, but we also have quite a few mid-career teachers and even those folks who have retired from another state and move here for the, to what we call double dip. I think, yeah, and this is something we can look at and kind of model. I can grab some examples of out-of-state teachers who have come to the state from this year, and we can look at we can try to look at a couple of things like what was their average loss or gain in salary by moving from wherever they came from to North Carolina. Now this would be a relatively small sample, but we tried to get some representative folks in this mix. But it seems to me that one of the things that we're recommending in this model is that irrespective of the $5,000 salary increase at the time of renewal, there would be the expectation and the communication to the General Assembly that we would expect that there'd be incremental cost of living adjustments. And so if we did take the step and lane salary schedule at the point at which we implement this and we kind of hold that to use for out-of-state teachers, then we could apply any cost of living adjustments to that step and lane salary scale. So that continues to go up and it doesn't just freeze in time, but anytime the General Assembly provides a cost of living adjustment for teachers separate and apart from the $5,000 renewal piece, we apply that same percentage to the step and lane, and we make sure everybody coming from out of state is held harmless at the years of experience that they would have earned in North Carolina. And I think this is the question. I'm not as concerned about the dollar figure we were able to give them. It's the license level that concerns me. So, I think we have to recognize under this model that very few teachers coming from out of state would be able to qualify for a license 4 initially. And so one of the things that you would have to determine as this subcommittee is do you create a special carve out for out-of-state teachers with a certain number of years of experience that they are by definition granted an L4, and then they have the renewal cycle to confirm that status. So that would give them 5 years to confirm that in North Carolina, they're meeting those requirements to be a license 4. Or do you say everybody from out of state who has passed the measures, has passed the requirements to hold a clear license from another state, if they come to us with a clear license, they're an L3 who are held harmless at a salary level, and they have 5 years to establish themselves into the North Carolina effectiveness model rather than the step and lane model. And Alexis, to answer your question, I think that's at the heart of this is if they have a certain amount of experience in another state, are we defining them as license 4? Or are we defining them as license 3 who are held harmless? With their what their salary would have been given their years of experience and education level in the old system until such time as they establish themselves in the new model.
This is Jeff, and I missed the beginning of the meeting, so I apologize if I missed this, but has there been any discussion about how we're going to handle teachers who are currently in North Carolina on sort of how they transition over to this new licensure system, which that could then be the model for how we handle out of state? You know, in my mind, if you're whatever the equivalent of a CPL out of state, that it might make sense for you to come in as an L4, and then you have to prove that you can keep that for the first 5 years you're here, you know, versus putting them at a more entry-level license. And that's sort of, I think, how we handle them now, currently, correct? In the current system, as they come in, if they have full licensure status in another state, then they come in as a fully licensed teacher here.
So to answer your initial question, yes, I think we've decided on a hold harmless strategy for in-state teachers, which is basically what we're describing here. Once the new model comes in effect, those folks, we determine everybody's salary based on that final year, and you can't go below that until such time as you're exceeding that in the new model. And we'll write that up, you know, all the details on that. But
Tom, is that their license level or just their salary?
it would be their salary wherever they fall on that license level.
Jeff, are you asking how do we determine who gets onto a license 3 versus 4 from the current schedule? So I think he's asking about kind of what is that transition from one schedule to the other? Are we, you know, if you're.
That's what we're talking about with out-of-state teachers too,
Yeah.
correct? Is how do we decide what license they get when they come in?
And so really this question that you're raising, Jeff, is for everybody, both in-state and out-of-state. Like, you know, initially when this model rolls out, you're not going to have the opportunity, you know, nobody's going to have, let's go with what we're calling the peer review. Nobody's going to have that initially. And if the licensure subcommittee selects the qualitative growth review or something similar to that, nobody's going to have that. So basically you would have a situation with only those teachers who have EVOS could possibly qualify, you know, under the terms of the plan to hold a license 4. So for the initial transition, do you say teachers with X years of experience are automatically placed into license 4, regardless any effectiveness measures or anything they have. And then they all get a 5-year renewal cycle to establish themselves as continuing L4s and getting that $5,000 increase, or they need another year of that, another renewal cycle in order to establish themselves and potentially get the $5,000 bonus. I think it's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. And Kim, I'm wondering if that's actually a prep and entry question, or is that a compensation and budget question?
Say that again, Tom.
So
Say the question
as
again.
we move from the old model, so let's say I'm a 10-year French teacher. I'm not going to have, the only thing that you could possibly bring with you from the old system to the new system is EVOS, because the other measures haven't been implemented yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't possibly qualify for a license 4 under the definitions. Is our implementation year, were we going in the first year of implementation, are we just going to determine whether teachers with a certain level of experience move into a license 4, or do they move into a license 3? At, where's that line, and how do we determine how they move forward? So like everybody with 10 years or more experience is a level 4 by definition, and they just start the renewal cycle, their 5-year renewal cycle, and they're working on those measures of effectiveness. Or do you say, or where do you put the line, I guess is the question. And who determines what that line is? Is it this committee, or is it the prep and entry?
Because prep and entry focuses on the entry points.
That's right. Where do you enter the model?
And Tom, my reason for bringing that question up is maybe that gives us a roadmap for how to handle out-of-state teachers. If we can figure out the idea of transitioning current teachers into the system, then maybe we just replicate that model for out-of-state teachers, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm going to defer to Dr. Graham on this as to whether he sees, I mean, this is a question that we haven't really considered in this. So Dr. Graham, if you feel like that question should be tackled by this subcommittee, I'm happy to let, prep and entry know that that your guys are going to take that, or would you rather defer that to the preparation and entry subcommittee?
First of all, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon. Sorry I was late. I had another meeting. I'm coming in on the tail end of the conversation, so I'm trying to piece together what I'm hearing. My gut feeling is, well, I've got two feelings, and they're kind of mutually opposed to each other. One is, the prep and entry group appears to me should be tackling that particular question. My concern is timing. We could kick it to that committee and say we need for you all to give us some guidance here, but I still think as this committee we have to try to figure out from a computational standpoint how we might factor in direction moving forward using our best guess or estimate of what we think prep and entry may do. I do agree with Superintendent Truitt's earlier comment. We don't want to do anything that would adversely impact out-of-state individuals from wanting to come to North Carolina, nor do we want to do anything that would adversely impact our existing teacher workforce. So, in many ways, I'm thinking much like Jeff is with respect to, this license 4 plus approach, which seems to be more advantageous and favorable, if you will, for our existing teacher workforce. But I do think prep and entry should be tackling this particular question as opposed to this committee.
All right. That's fair enough. We will take the recommendations we've heard in here that to them that they need to draw a line at some year of experience where you're going to be placed, you're coming to us out of state, you're going to automatically be placed in a license 4, and we will make that recommendation and that additional request for clarity to the prep and entry subcommittee. And we'll let them know that you're tackling the how do we compensate them piece of that puzzle. Wherever they put them, we're going to figure out how to compensate them.
Mhm.
Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay.
And just to add one other complication, they should also address out-of-state access and in-state access to the advanced levels as well, because you wouldn't want districts not to be able to try to recruit someone from another state and place them into an advanced role. You wouldn't want existing teachers not to have access to advanced roles for 5 years because they have to wait. So it's level 4, but also level 4 plus that needs to be entry criteria need to be established for out of state and for current teachers when the new system kicks in.
It's fair.
You did make that trickier, Dr. Hassel.
That's why you have this committee, right?
That's right.
Exactly.
Create
Yep.
difficulties.
I'll just add, I think Jeff's point about the similarities between transitioning to the schedule versus out of state is really helpful in this conversation, in this question. The other thing I kind of just posted in the chat is that we really do need to know what does that population look like, because I think Julie's point, if teachers in the field that believe that they're fully licensed are going to go to L4, that means like 80% are going to go to L4, which I think is a very reasonable expectation. If our out-of-state teachers, 80% are beginning, they're actually going to be coming in somewhere on a L1, 2, 3, and we need to figure that out. And if only 20% are coming in with, say, 5 years of experience, then it's kind of a no-brainer to give them the benefit of the doubt, or the employer, the principal or HR professional who's hiring them, the benefit of the doubt that they know that they feel like they've done their due diligence to determine that they would be a, quote, fully licensed teacher. So knowing what those percentages are also will help us know what the level of risk we're taking by putting people into a level 4 from out of state. If it's a smaller percentage, there's less risk. And again, it puts the trust and faith on the people who are hiring them.
All right. So one of my tasks will be to get the distribution of out-of-state teachers new to North Carolina, so we can look at this and see, and we'll try to model some of what on average they're gaining or losing by coming to North Carolina, and any recommendations we have about what's the most comparable, given the population, where the appropriate lines would be for determining L3 versus L4. That piece of information will probably go back to prep and entry, but the kind of how out-of-state teachers are faring in terms of compensation by coming to North Carolina will definitely be something we'll bring back to this subcommittee.
Tom, this is Marcy, and I know that we've talked quite a bit about out of state, and we've had just minor or just a minimal discussion about our international teachers. But there are 3 companies. There might be a 4th. I don't know if the 4th is still operating in the Charlotte area, that bring roughly 500 teachers here annually, new teachers annually on cultural exchange. But then you also have some districts that are recruiting teachers directly internationally and sponsoring them on an H-1B employment visa. And how will all of those fit? I think that might start with the licensure subcommittee initially, but there is the international license specific to the cultural exchange teachers that will need to be addressed, and then how they'll fit salary wise. Will have to come out as part of that as well, so that cultural exchange companies that are recruiting teachers can explain that to their recruits. That's just another layer, but it kind of aligns with out of state. I think my thought would be that it would align somewhat to out of state. You would look at that person where they are in their other country, because they have to go through the licensure evaluation process anyway. So I just don't want us to lose sight of the fact that that's got to be addressed. And I know that general statute handles it a little bit differently, but there need to be recommendations around those licenses as well.
Marcy, what pay are they coming at now?
So right now they come in and the companies that sponsor them evaluate their out of country backgrounds to get them, they qualify for an IPL, just like an in-state grad would, or a Virginia grad would if they're a first-year teacher. They qualify for that license, and then they have to provide documentation to the company of their past experience, their teaching experience. And the companies work with the districts who place the teachers where they're placed to put them on scale. There's a conversion in statute that allows the conversion of a position to dollars so that the district can pay them on their step. So that's legislated separately. And I know that will likely have to be addressed as part of the legislation when this happens, because based on what Alexis has shared, my questions around conversions or position allotments versus dollar allotments are still out there. That's not the work we're focused on right now, but we just need to make sure that they can get a license and where that license will fit financially on this system so that companies or districts who are recruiting for H1s can articulate where those people will fall as well.
And Marcy, is it still, this is Wendy, is it still that there's a max on that because there is a dollar allotment? I know in the past we've had international teachers who have come and may have 18 years and a master's, but their company caps them at an amount because over that amount they lose funding. You know, the company's not making money. Is that still the case?
Well, it's not that the company's not making money, but it exceeds the conversion. And so there have been limits in the past with some of the companies. Now, the two that I worked with in Wake did not have limits. If someone exceeded the conversion, if I had teacher A who exceeded the conversion, I basically had to cover that cost. But I might have another teacher who did not exceed the conversion, so that helped me make up the difference. And anything that exceeded it based on my contract with that company had to be paid out of local dollars. So that was different in the past than it is now. But my experience with the two companies that I worked with, we didn't have a cap. If I brought if we hired and placed a 25-year veteran, I paid that person based on 25 years and I lost money on the conversion. And there might be another few teachers that would help me make up the difference. So I would be fortunate to break even. I don't know. I've never worked. There's one of the there are 4 that are approved. I'm not sure that one of them is still operating in North Carolina. I have never worked with them. It's the one that's based out of Charlotte. I think it's ITES. Tom, does that make sense?
Yeah. So I guess my question on this is, is the decision from this group to handle international faculty just setting the license level and the associated salary that qualifies for the conversion, and then we don't have to go beyond that?
Yeah, I think it needs to be handled similarly and aligned to the way we're doing out-of-state teachers. That would be my recommendation, and we don't worry about the rest of it. We just need to identify how they're going to come in on the license in this new model, and that salary that would be aligned just like we're doing for out-of-state. So that's my recommendation and my thought process. The conversion and everything else will take care of itself later through the legislative process. Would be my assumption.
Well, I mean, the question goes to, what are you recommending? If the recommendation is for international faculty, we continue the conversion process, and this committee recommends converting every visiting international faculty person gets an L4 $56,000 salary, that's what it converts to cash for, and then we're out of the ball game. Like that's with the participating partners to work out? Or are you saying we actually integrate them into the model, which is different than we do now? We say, this is your years of experience. This would place you at an L4 or an L3, and then you can continue in the model. My concern here is integrating into the model. They're only here for 5 years.
Right.
So
Up to 5. Mhm.
is it to our advantage to try to fully integrate them into the model, or just determine what that conversion is and just leave it at that?
Well, and the conversion's not based on the salary. So the conversion is, to me, a completely separate point that is not really for us, because the General Assembly has legislated what the figure is for converting for international faculty versus converting for anything else in the allotment system. So that I don't think is our job, or even for us to discuss. I think for us, it's where are we going to put international teachers in this model for a license, and what's the salary that's going to be tied to that, because the conversion for them is average salary plus benefits. So that's completely different from just converting a salary. And I don't want to get into the conversion piece, because again, that's legislated separately, but they need to fit somewhere on this license schedule, or a license 3 or a license 4 for the 3 to 5 years that they're here.
Correct.
And then we need to, when we determine where they are, if it's a 3 or a 4 and they fit on that schedule, that's fine. I don't have a strong opinion about where they would fit, but we just need to make sure that it's something that the 3 or 4 operating companies in the state understand. All of your teachers that come in now from out of country are going to be a level 3 if they're here, or a level 4 if they're here. And integrate them, I guess, would be putting them in this model, and that would already establish their minimum salary.
I got you. All right, we will propose something for that, and what we bring back to you next month with the out of state issue.
Thank you.
Yep.
Right, colleagues, I hate to bring that conversation to a close, but we do have Dr. Bastian here, who's kind enough to join us today to engage us in conversation about the master's level pay, taking a look at historical data here in the state of North Carolina. So just as a kind of putting a bow on that final conversation, a couple of to-do items. Dr. Tomlin is going to do a distribution of out-of-state teachers so we can take a look at the population that we're dealing with in that area. We're also going to refer to the Prep and Entry Committee information on establishing the lines between that license 3, license 4 space. And Dr. Holland, thank you for bringing to our attention yet again the international teachers. We will come back in our next meeting with a recommendation, if you will, a proposal for us to review, discuss, and consider, and then we'll determine where to go as a result of that conversation. So those are the the 3 to-do items that I've captured here in my notes. Am I missing anything? All right. Hearing none, then we'll transition to Dr. Bastian. Dr. Bastian, we're glad to have you with us this afternoon. Thank you for making time in your busy schedule to engage us in a conversation about master's level pay. So I'll turn the floor over to you, sir.
Sort of on this topic, and then engage in conversation around it past that. So thanks, Kim. We can go to that. Yep, perfect. Background that you're all very likely aware of course, is, North Carolina continues to award, a national board certification pay increase prior to 2013. was awarding teachers graduate degree pay increases on sort of a variable percentage based on the degree level of that graduate degree, master's, PhD, etc. But then since 2013, that hasn't been the case for new graduate degree earners. I wanted to start this, I think, with some conceptual conversations, I think, that are important because it really influences, especially in the current model we have and other states and districts have, how people view the efficacy, if you will, of graduate degree pay. And so I first start by pointing out that I think there's probably a lack of clarity as what that graduate degree pay increase is for. Is the graduate degree pay increase given because those graduate degree holders are expected to be more effective than those with an undergraduate degree only? So sort of signaling that they're more effective than peers with less educational attainment? Or is that graduate degree sort of pay increase being given because they may be more effective now that they have their graduate degree than they were prior to that? So learning and knowledge that happened during the time of acquiring that advanced degree help them be a better teacher, right? Better than they used to be. Not necessarily better than an teacher only with an undergrad, but better than they used to be. And so I don't think there's clarity there exactly about sort of what the goal of graduate degree pay is. And so I think that makes it a little bit harder to challenge, harder to sort of assess the efficacy of the policy. In trying to think about considerations of grad degree pay and teacher performance, a few things come to mind. One is that, and I don't think this is very surprising, right? That the content of area of the graduate degree may have a lot of import as to whether it impacts that teacher's performance. There's plenty of work, not to sound like an economist, but there's plenty of work that talks about the benefits of job-specific human capital, right? Like if you student teach in third grade and your first job's in third grade, on average, you're more effective, right? Because you've learned, you spent, a semester, a year learning about third grade, and then you get to go teach it. Likewise, I think there's analogous scenarios here, right? If your content of your graduate degree is in mathematics and you're teaching math, maybe that matters more than if your content of your graduate degree, is a school administration graduate degree, for instance. And that may not matter as much to your instruction in math. I think thinking about timing is also important. Was the degree earned pre or post entry into teaching? Also trying to think about methodologically when you think about timing. If you want to see whether someone's better with a graduate degree than they were before when they didn't have a graduate degree, that could be a little challenging too, right? Because what if over time, while they're working on getting the degree, they're getting better? And so that's kind of happening while they're getting the degree. And so when you compare pre and post, that's not a clean comparison, for instance. And then I think, so a last consideration of note is just the policy comparisons of this, I suppose, right? Is, as we've noted, and we all know, sort of, graduate degrees are not sort of the only teacher credential in which North Carolina or other places, pay differential amounts to teachers. And national board certification is obviously the other one. And so in this work, as I talked about some of the work we did several years ago, national board cert was a part of that and sort of looking at results for them as well. So I'm going to talk today about a study that feels rather old now, done back around 2015-ish, I think. And is looking at both the value added of graduate degree holders and their evaluation ratings. And of course, and I'll talk a little bit more about the data in a second, but this would have been fairly early on in the state's use of its current evaluation system. In this work, we were leveraging both statewide administrative data from NCDPI on, people's degree levels and some more granular data from the UNC system that really looked at, let us know like what that degree was in. And we coded graduate degrees in several different ways. One, just the most basic, did a given teacher have a graduate degree in a given year? But then we also thought about the timing of that graduate degree. Did it come pre or post entry into teaching? And we could also create some some measures, for like when were they getting that degree and what years were they teaching right before that and right after that, to get at that idea a little bit that their gains, hypothetical gains in effectiveness may not come after they walk across the stage and officially get a graduate degree and get recognized for that by the state, but while they're also doing it. And then we were very interested in the content of that graduate degree. And for teachers for whom we're teaching a tested grade or subject, how does that content of the graduate degree line up with that tested area, the subject area they're teaching? So we could know whether their degree was in area. So again, they teach middle grades math and they get a mathematics graduate degree, or out of area. So again, we were looking at student test scores from the 05-06 through 13-14 year here in North Carolina. It would have been, end of grade and end of course exams that existed at the time. And obviously over that data period, the EOG stayed pretty consistent, or did stay consistent, but the number of EOCs we had shrunk some over time. And then looking at 3 years of data from the state's evaluation system, 11-12 through 13-14. And again, using data from both NCDPI and the UNC system to know about graduate degree like areas and who has them. For both of those outcomes, basically teacher value added to student achievement or teacher effectiveness in that sense, and evaluation ratings, we estimated 2 broad types of a model. What I would call a signaling model, which is just asking whether those with a graduate degree are more effective than those with an undergrad only. And then what I would call a human capital model. Are teachers more effective after earning a graduate degree than they were before? And in this work, we really tried to control for a rich set of characteristics in these regressions, about the kids, about the classrooms, about the schools, about the teachers, to isolate as best we can, sort of that relationship between graduate degree and outcome. So this is just a little bit of descriptive for the data we're looking at here, 05-06 through 13-14. This figure is displaying the percentage of teacher year records for those with a graduate degree, to be clear. And 30-some% of the teacher workforce had a graduate degree. So for those with the graduate degree, this is showing the percentage of teacher year records that have certain types of degree. And you can see roughly, 2/3 of them are post-entry into teaching. 1/3 of the graduate degrees are held by people who had them when they entered. A quarter of them are in elementary grades in terms of the graduate degree. You can see by content areas how that breaks down by special ed, English or reading, math, science, social studies, school administration. And then there was this other, which was sort of a broader category because there was a lot of different types. And then there was a decent percentage of graduate degrees there on the very bottom who we still really couldn't classify what it was in. Okay, so I'll orient you to the results here. The columns, so we're looking at teacher effectiveness, so we're looking at student test scores, so teacher impacts on student test scores here. The columns, of course, would be the general grade level or subject areas we're looking at. Elementary math, reading, 5th grade science, middle grades, and then high school EOCs. The top row, and again, we're looking at, in this case, graduate degree holders. Are they more effective than teachers without a graduate degree? So are they more effective than undergrads only? That's what we're asking here. You can see that the top row is just comparing a person with any graduate degree, doesn't care what it's in or when it came, to undergrads. And undergrads actually are teachers with undergrads only, and actually teachers in their same buildings. And we see here that the results I would characterize as being quite modest in size. They're small, but there are 5 negative and statistically significant coefficients. Again, they're modest and small, but in 5 of these instances, those with a graduate degree were actually less effective than those with an undergrad, teachers with an undergrad degree only in their same buildings, teaching these subjects. But the picture gets a little bit, sorry, Kim, go back, yeah. Picture gets a little bit different if you go into that middle panel. And now we're comparing those with an in-area graduate degree, an out-of-area graduate degree, or one we can't classify to undergrads only. And when you do it that way, what you really see is actually there's 2 positive results for an in-area degree in middle grades math and high school math, which fits a little bit with prior work on mathematics and having a degree in that and outcomes. And you could actually see that the negative results that the overall negative results you see at the top row are really more being carried by those with an out of area graduate degree. So if they're teaching, 5th grade science and they're getting a graduate degree in something that's not related to science or elementary grades instruction, then they're less effective. So the negative results are really more concentrated there. And then lastly, I'd simply point out, because again, this is relative, right? MBC holders also get pay bumps, and we were controlling for teachers having MBC in the models as well. And you can see there in that 3rd panel where it says NBC teacher, in every comparison, all 10, I think, columns we have here, MBC holders were significantly more effective than non-MBC teachers. So that's the comparison there for MBC teacher. They're being compared to non-MBC teachers. But in each comparison here, they were more effective than non-MBC teachers. All right, now we can go, Kim. Thank you. All right, so this is the same question. Are graduate degree holders more effective than their peers in the same buildings who only have an undergraduate degree? But we're looking at the state's evaluation system now. And you can see across the top, the 5 columns are the 5 professional teaching standards. In this case, we show that graduate degree holders earn statistically significantly higher evaluation ratings than their peers in the same building with an undergrad only. I would note, these are just to give you a little bit more background on sort of the unit here. We standardized these evaluation ratings. So this is like for the leadership standard, we're saying that graduate degree holders have leadership ratings 6% of a standard deviation higher than their peers with an undergrad only. I would characterize again these results as certainly positive and significant for graduate degree holders in this case, but fairly modest in size. Again, if you go down to that middle panel, it has some corollaries to the teacher value added table we were just looking at previous, in the sense that in this case, sort of the weight of the positive results for graduate degrees overall in the top row here is again really being carried more by in-area degrees. Folks and their ratings who have an in-area degree, and those with an out-of-area degree, the results are just, there's one positive result, but they're mostly just statistically insignificant. Lastly, again, to let you think about benchmarking the size of these results, again, you can compare the overall graduate degree results at the very top, or even the in-area results there in the middle, to the National Board Cert results towards the bottom. And again, there's clear evidence, and the size of the results are much larger, that those teachers with an MBC have much higher evaluation ratings than non-MBC teachers in their buildings. All right, so then now we shift to the second question, or the second part of it, right, which is which is a little bit more about, are graduate degree holders more effective after they earn a graduate degree than they were before? If you look at the very top, you'll see that in 2 instances, that's the case. In 5th grade science and high school English, we see that graduate degree holders are more effective now after earning a degree than they were before. If you look into the middle panel, you see that's the case for 4 instances for in-area degrees: science, middle math, 5th grade science, middle math, high school science, and high school social studies. There's no significant results in either direction for out-of-area degrees. And actually here you see, there's really generally no results for MBC teachers either. They're more effective. This evidence would suggest MBC teachers are more effective than those who don't have an MBC. That's what we saw in the previous slides. But the process of getting an MBC, they're no more effective than they were before earning that credential. And then lastly, this carries it through to looking at whether those with a graduate degree earn higher ratings on the state's evaluation system after earning a grad degree than they did before. And one note of caution here is, again, this research was done back in 2015, 2016, and at that point, we're only using 3 years of evaluation ratings, which means there's not a lot of time in this to look at changes and compare someone pre getting a graduate degree and post and looking at changes in their ratings. So, I would caution that these are sort of limited in that sense, these analyses. But there's a tiny bit of evidence here, that, those earning a graduate degree earn higher ratings, particularly on the leadership standard, and particularly when it's an in-area degree after earning that degree than they did before. And there's just no other really significant results otherwise. Again, a little bit of that could be relative to just the small number of years we were looking at. So what I just showed you, those last 4 slides, really was culminated in some work and a publication. But there was some other analyses that, of course, that went into that that didn't sort of make the cutting board. And so I wanted to bring a few of those back up. One of those was simply that there's some evidence that those earning a graduate degree before entry into teaching, so pre-entry, were less effective than those with an undergraduate degree only in a couple of the value-added comparisons. I didn't show that, but we saw that a little bit in other analyses we ran. We did also run some analyses on teacher retention, which I haven't talked about thus far. I've been talking about teacher performance. And when the data we were looking at, and again, we could leverage this question and leverage this data because we have data from the UNC system in this case, that we saw that those with a graduate degree from a school or college of education were more likely to return to the state's public school in the following year than teachers with an undergrad degree only. But conversely, those with a graduate degree in a content area, so outside of a school of ed, so maybe it's in math, maybe it's in science, they were a little bit less likely to return to teach in a state in the following year. And, to be fair, I think that makes a fair amount of economic sense in terms of a graduate degree in mathematics may be more portable to other employment opportunities, whereas a graduate degree from a college of education is more of a commitment to education as a profession. So those are just a couple other sort of key findings I wanted to bring up. So just sort of summary and final thoughts. For the most part, I think these results are modest in size. They don't really they show little benefit to graduate degrees overall, but some positive results really for in-area degrees in some instances, and certainly some negative results for the out-of-area degree. I think it's important to note, and others have done some work in this space, including Helen Ladd and Lucy Sorensen did some work on some other outcomes. Teachers can have impacts on other outcomes, student attendance, for example, student engagement in instruction, et cetera. And I know they found some positive results in middle grades for student attendance for teachers with a graduate degree. I think it's worth pointing out, obviously, that these analyses, or at least the data from these analyses, goes back a bit now. And there can be questions about how shifts in state policy since that time, have changed who's getting a graduate degree, in what areas, and what does that mean for their performance? And then I think the big question, obviously, for you all and any sort of thoughtful stakeholder who wants to promote the teaching profession is just simply how to both act on evidence and be a state or a district that recognizes and rewards teachers' efforts to improve their knowledge and skills, right? How to make that work. So that's it. Happy to certainly talk about this more.
There's a question in the chat, Kevin.
Okay, let me go to it. Good question. Yeah, so our MBC, no, they're all MBC teachers here. We controlled for both national board cert status in the model and graduate degree status in the model because we also didn't want to misattribute the effectiveness of a teacher to one of those credentials versus another. By which I'm saying, if if we see certain teachers are more effective, we wanted to sort of parse out what we think it's due to the MBC versus grad degree. So both of those controls were in the model, and it would have included all those with an MBC or all those with a graduate degree. Hopefully that answers that.
Thanks, Kevin. Colleagues, now is a perfect opportunity to engage in this conversation, ask questions. We realize the data are a little old, but we wanted to ensure that everyone on this committee had a point of reference, if you will, for where this conversation ended some time ago, and some of the data that went into the decision, unfortunately, to end master's pay in the state of North Carolina. Not the sole reason, but a part of the variables, if you will, that went into that consideration. So as we're thinking about our new compensation model and the ideas we have relative to whether or not master's level pay should be included in this model as a recommendation from this body, wanted to make certain that we delved into this conversation and had some discussion here. So if you have questions, please, now is the time to bring those to the forefront, or observations or comments. We'd like to hear from you.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to hear this. It's Catherine Truitt. Kevin, I just have to, for me, the elephant in the room is, does it matter that these data are 10 years old? I mean, at the end of the day, does it matter? Not much has changed policy wise in our College of Education requirements. So I just was curious to know, from your point of view, how do you answer that question?
I think my hypothesis would be no, it probably doesn't matter. I mean, in the sense that, I think to your point, Kevin, what people are learning in a graduate degree and how that might apply to their teaching, for instance, and whether that applies better, whether it's in area or out of area, I think conceptually that should all apply. I think my only question to your kind of comment there would be on that last slide I had, over the last 10 years, and I don't know the answer to this question, but like 9 to 10 years essentially at this point, have there been some shifts in who gets a graduate degree, given changes in state policy? And what might that mean then for looking at some of these outcomes with very recent data, if that makes sense? Like if really high caliber teachers choose not to go get a grad, I'm just making up a scenario, right? Choose not to go get a graduate degree now. Does that mean then anything for what type of results we might get now? But I think in a world where I still think that in sort of the world we're talking about here, that the results hold and would be pretty similar now.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Dr. Graham, this is Jeff.
Sir.
Coltrane, Kevin, thanks for this presentation. It's very fascinating data, and I was a bit, I guess, surprised at how strong the national board certification results are, which I think is positive. And I think something you mentioned is that the certification doesn't seem to lead to more effectiveness. It's that it's measuring teachers who are more effective, which I think is an interesting finding. But from my perspective, I think this subcommittee at our last meeting or the meeting before that sort of approved including as part of the model that the proposal should say that current policies on master's pay and national board certification pay should continue as is. And in my mind, this data sort of backs that up. Clearly, we're seeing impacts from national board certification. So continuing to compensate teachers who have earned that certification and also who may earn it in the future, I think makes sense. The master's pay is a little trickier, but I think given our previous conversation on hold harmless, If we don't want to penalize teachers under the new system, then we should keep the current policy, which doesn't penalize teachers who earn master's degree before the change. So it seems to me that this would back that up. I think it's a decision as to if teachers with master's pay, teachers who earn a master's after August of 2014 should earn, a degree. There's political differences on that. I know the governor, my boss, has been proposing that we should do that, but that's probably outside of the scope of this subcommittee's work. So I think maintaining current policy seems to make sense given this.
Thanks, Jeff. Other comments or observations, thoughts, or questions?
This is Stephen Martin, and again, I apologize. I didn't see the entire presentation. I did see the last few minutes. I believe that master's pay or all advanced degrees, we should compensate separately on. I think it's a matter of what we value. And in education, I think we value advancing oneself and advancing degrees. So I would like to see us continue to pay on master's and advanced degrees and national boards. And I would actually like to see us reinstate master's and advanced degrees for teachers prior to 2000 or post 2014. I do believe we have fewer teachers who are pursuing master's degrees based on policy changes. And I think our university colleagues probably have some data on their master's level programs in education and the numbers that have been seeking degrees post 2014 and prior to 2014.
Thank you, sir. Other reactions or comments?
Dr. Tomberlin has his hand up, and Superintendent Truitt asked a question in the chat for Kevin.
So we'll go Dr. Tomberlin, and then we'll get your question, Superintendent Truitt. Dr. Tomberlin.
So Kevin, I apologize. I had to step out during your presentation, but in your analysis, it seemed like you were comparing teachers who hold a master's degree with those who don't. Was there any analysis to look at whether the teacher prior to earning the master's degree, any effectiveness prior and post master's degree, if there were any changes in effectiveness within the individual?
Yes, we did look at both, Tom, and there was some comparing master's degree holders or graduate degree holders, which is more accurate because it's not just a master's, to undergrads only. There was the results again were stronger for in area graduate degrees. And then, yes, we looked sort of comparing within teachers over time to getting that graduate degree help them. And, for teacher effectiveness in terms of student achievement, we saw that in a few cases that, yes, they were more effective after than they were before. And it tended to be a little bit more, when we're talking about student achievement I'm not necessarily surprised by this in STEM subject areas, it's science or mathematics, where we saw some more of the significant and positive results, which is, I think, generally consistent with some prior work about, sort of content knowledge and degrees and benefits.
Thank you.
And Kevin, the question from Superintendent Truitt is, if we pay for in-area master's degrees, are we incenting people to leave the profession?
So is the question more you're worried if they get like a degree in mathematics, just carrying forward that example, I suppose?
Yeah, because that's what your data showed, is that if they have certain subject areas, if they have they were less likely to come back to the North Carolina public school system, unless I misunderstood you.
No, that was correct. I mean, and we were, I think the one caveat there is, we were leveraging UNC system data to answer that question. So it's a sample, I suppose, if you will. I mean, again, those getting a degree from the UNC system, a graduate degree, I mean, that's a good percentage of our workforce and those getting their graduate degrees. But the level of granularity in the data let us answer it with those data. But yes, you were correct. I mean, like those getting a content, I guess, parsing a little bit, content area graduate degree, meaning outside of a school of education, we're modestly, I don't think we should call these huge results. We're modestly more likely to leave than peers with an undergrad only, versus those getting a degree from a college of education were a little bit less likely to leave or more likely to stay than peers with an undergrad only. But I think it's
Okay,
worth
so
noting.
not cause for concern, in other words.
I don't think so. I mean, I think it is worth noting that an in-area degree can come from a content area like a mathematics department, but it can also come from a school of ed too. Like you can get an elementary degree, graduate degree, and teach elementary, right? So there's some overlap, but those are some distinctions. So I wouldn't necessarily be too worried about that.
Okay, thank you.
And Kevin, do we know if those folk, when they left the state, if they were leaving for other teaching jobs in other states, or if they were leaving for professions external to education?
The answer is no, but I know we don't know that is the answer. So I'm more clear, but I know that this state is working on ways to better connect data systems that sit outside of each other, from employment, to et cetera. And so I think there's ways to start to know that a little bit better over time. I would say, just for what it's worth, there's been some great new work in one district in the western part of the United States that's actually been able to leverage IRS data to look at sort of where teachers go after they leave teaching. And the answer is, at least in that specific context, that they're not necessarily going someplace else. They're going to go make more money. And a lot of them are still staying in education in some way, but they're not necessarily jumping, at least at that point, to higher paid careers on average. But yes, to that question, Dr. Graham, I mean, I do think we need better connected systems to know that more over time.
Gotcha. I know there's a lot of activity in the chat. I'm trying to look through it all. So if I'm not getting your question or your comment and you'd like to come off mute, please do. I want to make certain that we hear from you. Let's see.
I was looking at Julie Pittman's comment about teacher feedback about pay for in area versus compensated and out of area not. And I mean, I think that would better align with what this research shows.
Yeah, I put this in the chat. This is Brenda Berg. What I'm seeing here is and please correct me if I'm wrong, if a master's degree is helping an individual teacher get better, that those master's programs could really pitch to teachers and say, hey, if you want to make sure you're renewing your license, or if you want to move into a leadership role, our master's degree has been shown to help people do that, right? So there could be, that incentive to get a master's degree, but it's not you get it, you get the money, because it's really, again, about the effectiveness. And that's, again, how it kind of works in the, I hate to say the public, in the private sector, is you don't get paid for a master's degree. You get paid because you have earned a qualification getting that master's degree. So I can't help but wonder if this model is actually, barring sort of just paying flat out for master's degree, if this model doesn't actually incentivize master's degrees in a new way that will benefit the ed prep programs. Am I missing something?
Was that towards me, Brenda? Sorry, I just wanted to.
Yeah, I'm just trying to put the pieces together of what your study's facts with this proposed model.
I think, yes, I would say there's instances, obviously, where teachers were more effective after earning a graduate degree than they were before. Now, that doesn't obviously sort of get down to the EPP level. I mean, we don't know which EPPs may actually be adding value there in their graduate degree, offerings, if you will, versus those who may not. Like, and that's more granular than this looked at, right? I would imagine like any work on EPPs, some EPPs are proving to be more effective in certain areas than others. So yes, I mean, to a broader question, I mean, I think yes, EPPs could use data and evidence about the quality of their programming to incentivize folks to come there and show that it's a value, but this data doesn't quite go to that level.
And relatedly, Brian Hassel wanted to read his comment. In the current steps and lane system, when the General Assembly dropped the master's bump, they eliminated any compensation related value of masters. In the proposed system, teachers would be able to advance by achieving effectiveness and by qualifying for and getting jobs in advanced roles. In this world, EPPs will be able to design master's programs specifically to help teachers achieve these milestones, creating compensation value for master's degrees indirectly. So that's a related note that I wanted to make certain that I connected to this conversation. And from the university level, just speaking from the provost seat and what we're seeing obviously across the state with our educator preparation programs, absolutely our master's degree enrollment in our education programs have declined precipitously since 2014. And that should be no surprise, connected to Brian's comment, the master's somewhat lost its value when the compensation went away. So how, as an EPP, you could recreate the value of the master's in this pathways model would be something that I promise you most deans of the schools and colleges of education will be considering and having to think through if this committee or any committee does not recommend that master's level pay is reinstated moving forward. So, but that's part of what our committee must come to a determination. Are we, as a subcommittee, advocating for the reinstatement of master's level pay, or are we going to stick with the existing policy that will continue to support those individuals who have national board and master's pay, and we operate in that regard? So I want to be mindful of time. We're at 12:57. We've got 3 minutes remaining. Kevin, thank you so very much for joining us this afternoon and for helping us to kind of recalibrate on this conversation that's now a decade old, but it is still a burning topic of discussion in our state. And we've got to make some determination as a committee moving forward about what direction we want to take. So thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to join with you all.
So colleagues, in the 2 minutes we have remaining, any final comments or questions or thoughts relative to the master's level pay discussion, reinstatement of master's level pay? Okay. Well, we will continue to have conversation here and try to leverage our data as best we can to, as a committee, come up with an informed recommendation moving forward. I know each of us has our own kind of unique feeling, if you will, with respect to the reinstatement of master's level pay. And I want us to move from that feeling to an evidence-informed decision. And that's where we need to get as a group. So, Dr. Evans, Dr. Tomlin, any other order of business that we have not addressed this afternoon that we need to address?
No, I believe that was what was on the agenda.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Colleagues, any final comments or questions before I move us to an adjournment?
Dr. Graham, I just want to make sure we're going to try to have some decision points for you folks next session. Should we create a recommendation for master's degrees and national boards? Just putting it on a slide so that everybody knows what we're making decisions on. Is this part of what you'd like to see next month for decisions to be made?
I would answer yes to that, Dr. Tomberlin.
Great, thank you.
All right, colleagues, it's 1 o'clock. At this moment in time, I will accept a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
And I heard a second. It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you so very much, you all. Meeting adjourned. Have a great afternoon.